Place Called Perfect, Chapter 35. The Last Stand. Violet waited a few minutes in the darkness. Boy still hadn't arrived. She had to go in. She snuck by the pillars past the billboard of the Happy Family and round the green to her left. Violet was nearing Macula's house when another shot ripped the air. Suddenly the night was filled with the shrill cry of 1,000 wailing babies. The eyes were awake. Goose pimples prickled her skin. "Oh, shut up!" someone yelled. Violet ran and ducked behind a half-built wall in the garden of Macula's house as two figures emerged, walking across the green in her direction. Edward Archer was pushing her dad roughly over the grass. They stopped briefly, and Edward pulled 2 eye plants from the soil, throwing them into a plastic bag he took from his pocket. The screeches and wails grew louder, and the plants shook in a mass frenzy. Her father seemed very weak and stumbled several times, trying to keep pace with Edward. What had they done to him? She looked away, plunged her fingers deep into the loose earth, and squeezed the soggy soil. Her body shook. She wanted to act, but she'd learned the art of timing from Boy. "Faster, Eugene!" Edward roared. "We have to get out of here. That blasted brother William never could keep to his own business." "I can't move any faster," Dad coughed, tripping over a tuft of grass. "I haven't eaten in days." "I fed you last week." "I'm not a plant," her father complained. "Once a week isn't enough. Where are you taking me?" "Somewhere else," Edward sneered. "I'm going to create my own perfect where William won't find me." He was advancing on Macula's house. "What about my family? You promised they'd be okay." "Oh, they are, Eugene. Well, your wife is at least. She's perfect. As for that daughter of yours, I left her in the middle of a battle." He let out a hollow laugh. "With any luck, my watchers will have sorted her out by now." "Violet's fighting back," Eugene said with a hint of hope. "I knew it. She's braver than all of us." Her father's voice was weak. He was standing on Macula's lawn, just meters away from Violet, a broken man. She had to do something. Suddenly she was on her feet. "Dad!" Eugene Brown turned to face his daughter. All weakness left him, and he ran, wrapping her in his bony embrace. He held Violet tighter than ever before. All her bravery fled, and she was his girl again as she collapsed into his arms. Another shot cut the night. Eugene pushed Violet behind his back and turned to face Edward. The stocky twin pointed his pistol at the pair. "Eugene, get back here!" "You've had your day, Edward Archer. I won't let you take my family." Her father's voice was strong and steady, like the old hymn. "I don't want your family. They can go to hell as far as I care. You're the only one I need." Edward's eyes bulged, ready to pop their sockets. "You can't have me. You've taken enough. You have my research. Take it and leave us be. Do your sick project somewhere else." "I can have whatever I want. I have the whole town at my fingertips." "Had," Violet shouted, sneaking out from behind her father. "The town isn't yours anymore. William saved it." Violet noticed movement in the upstairs window of the house. A shadow passed by the pane and rested there for a moment, then retreated back into the shadows of the room. It was Macula Archer. "William is a better man than you'll ever be," Violet roared, drawing all attention towards herself. "Oh, William the golden boy. Everybody loves William. Well, he can take perfect if he wants, but I will have his precious Macula. She's mine," Edward said. "You kept her prisoner," Violet shouted loud enough for Macula to hear. "You told her lies, made her believe William was dead when he's not." "You'd better shut your mouth, little girl." Edward's voice was full of venom. Macula gently prised open the upstairs window. Eugene had seen her now too. "Just go, Edward. We won't try to stop you. Perfect is gone. The game's over," her dad shouted. "Not without Macula." "She doesn't love you," Violet roared. "I will not leave without her. William robbed me of my mother. I didn't really want that old bat anyway. He robbed me of my friends too. Okay, so they were a bunch of idiots, but when he stole Macula, that was too much. He didn't get to keep her though, did he? She's mine now. I'm taking something from William. I'm doing it right under his nose, and there's no way you Browns can stop me. Macula loves me." Edward Archer turned and charged for the house. The window was fully open. It was now or never. Violet raced across the lawn towards him. "She doesn't love you. She loves William." The stout twin stopped, turned and glared at Violet. His eyes changed. Hatred was replaced by evil. She'd made a deadly mistake. Time slowed. He raised his arm and cocked the gun. A faint click, then bang! Something heavy slammed into Violet's chest, and she was catapulted backwards. The air left her lungs as she was smashed into the soil. Everything went hazy, foggy. She couldn't see. Slowly shadows merged. Her father's face floated in the sky above. "Violet? Violet, are you okay?" A voice echoed around her. I'm She couldn't reply. The weight. Something was sitting on her chest. Edward must have shot her. It always happened this way in films. The person took ages to realise they'd been hurt. She felt no pain. There was never any pain in the movies. "That boy, he saved your life," her father stammered. "What?" Violet bolted upright and the weight seemed to shift. She wasn't dying. A boy slumped off her chest onto the grass beside her, unconscious. He was floppy, just like he'd been after he'd fought fists. Boy, please wake up," she cried, kneeling over his body. "Let me take a look," Eugene said, pulling Violet aside. "Will he be okay, Dad?" she sobbed. "He's my best friend." The front door of the house opened and Macula Archer ran out across the lawn, picking up the gun from where it lay by Edward's open hand. The stout twin was out cold on the grass. "Is your friend okay?" she panted, reaching Boy's side. "He saved your life." Violet was hysterical as Macula pulled her away from the scene. She was shaking. Pain dug into her chest. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't lose him. He couldn't be dead. Not now. Not after everything. Edward Archer was sprawled flat across the lawn behind Macula. The thickest book ever lay open beside him. The World's 1,000 Worst Eye Ailments. "I dropped it on his head," Macula smiled, glancing up at the open window as she hugged Violet closer. Boy's lips were a faint blue now. His cheeks paled too. Time slowed and Violet stood still, frozen, as her father bent over her friend. He was gently slapping Boy's face, saying his name. Anger boiled her blood. Edward Archer couldn't get away with this. Unable to watch any longer, she broke from Macula's arms and turned to the unconscious twin. But he had disappeared. Quickly she scanned the area. His stocky figure was wobbling up the hill towards the graveyard. Furious, she sprinted after him. Anger propelled her legs forward. Everything was his fault, and now he'd killed the best friend she'd ever had. Edward Archer would suffer. He would pay. The twin staggered past the lantern. She followed and watched as he slipped into the graveyard. Though it was the dead of night, she wasn't afraid as she entered through the turnstile. Gravestones lined the path that divided the cemetery. She couldn't see him. She ducked down behind a headstone and waited, listening. Her heart beat loudly as her breath formed icy clouds in front of her. The graveyard was dead still. "I know you're in here, Edward Archer," she shouted. "You won't get away with this. My dad and William are on their way." "You're on your own, Violet," the twin laughed, his voice echoing around the tombstones. "Aren't you afraid?" Something moved behind her. Quickly she turned and raced after the figure. Edward cut through the tightly packed graves. In her haste she tripped and fell onto the path, bloodying her palms. She stopped and turned, a shadow in the night. "What's wrong, Violet?" he mocked, moving towards her. Suddenly her dad's voice carried on the air. "Violet! Violet, where are you?" He was at the graveyard wall. "Seems like you're saved this time, Violet," Edward sneered, "but we'll meet again." A strange sound like stone crunching over stone filled the space. Violet picked herself up and raced to where Edward had stood moments before, but he'd vanished behind a tombstone. She checked nearby but saw nothing. Where could he have gone? The tomb where he'd last stood was covered in thick moss. She scraped it away to read the inscription, but the text was too damaged by time to make any sense. "Violet, why did you run off? Don't do that to me again," her father panted, reaching her side. "I'm sorry, Dad," she stammered, looking up at him. "It's just I wanted to catch Edward Archer. He can't get away with what he did to Boy. He's gone though, Dad. He's disappeared." "I know, Violet," her father soothed, pulling her up into his arms. "Don't worry, we'll track him down. Those Archers are not as clever as they think. As for your friend Boy, he's going to be fine." "Boy's alive?" "And kicking," her father laughed. "Macula dropping that book on Edward's head caused him to misfire. Your friend just knocked himself out in the fall, saving you." Happiness, relief and exhaustion flooded Violet's body. She buried her head deep in her father's shoulder and cried. Not for sad things, but for Boy. Her best friend was going to be okay. Macula was tending to Boy on the soggy grass when they reached them. Violet ran over and hugged her friend. "What's that for?" Boy smiled groggily. "For you being alive." "I told you before, it'll take a lot more to kill me," he joked. "I'm a no-man's lander, remember?" Her father bent down and helped Boy up from the ground. He was too hazy to walk unaided. "Come on," Eugene smiled. "Let's go home." A piece of paper lay on the lawn where Boy had been. It must have slipped from his pocket in the fall. Violet picked it up and read the short message. "So you'll never be invisible." Suddenly she knew what had been familiar about the note. The beautiful handwriting. She'd seen it before in Macula's room, the letter on her desk. Holding the prized paper gently in her grasp, she ran to catch the others. "I think this is yours," Violet said, tugging on Macula Archer's sleeve. "You gave it to a friend of mine a long time ago." "Oh, thank you," she said, a little puzzled. Macula opened the note to read it, just as someone called her name in the distance. A figure was standing shadowed at the entrance to the ghost estate. "Macula!" William cried again, his voice shaky. Macula stopped dead in the road. Violet almost walked into the back of her. Macula's hands cupped her mouth and she gasped, crumbling slightly on the spot. William raced along the tarmac and on reaching her, wrapped Macula in his arms and as she struggled to stand. Moments later she grabbed his face. "It's you! It's really you!" she repeated over and over again, as if the words were only true if she said them 1,000,000 times. Violet was watching the pair in silence when she noticed her dad beckoning to her. "Leave them be, Violet," Eugene said gently. She tiptoed round the couple and took Boy's other hand. The three hobbled together out of the estate towards the bridge onto No Man's Land. "Dad," she said, looking up. "Yes, pet?" "Mum will be okay too." "I know, pet," her dad said, a quiver in his tone. Everyone waited eagerly in Iris Archer's house for a war-worn William to fix the Reimaginator. Violet was sitting beside her dad, holding tightly to his hand, while he used the other one to shovel Iris's homemade stew into his mouth. Violet had never seen him eat so much before, though she'd never seen him so skinny either. Her other hand was wrapped around Boy's. He was still a little shaken after the fall. Macula took up a seat beside him, her eyes red-rimmed. Violet looked away, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation Iris was having with Madeline. "I believe this is your note," Macula said, passing it across to Boy. "I remember the day so vividly, forming each and every letter, knowing that this was all you'd have of me. I'm your mother, Boy." Boy's grip tightened on Violet's hand. She looked over, trying to read his expression. He was silent, his dark eyes large on his pale face. "I'm so proud of you, Boy. You've turned into everything I ever dreamed of." But you gave me away," he stuttered, gripping Violet's hand tighter. Macula dropped her head and Violet could see she was crying. "The twins told me your father, William, was dead. I thought they'd killed him. They hated him, you see. I had just discovered I was pregnant, and I knew if the brothers found out I was carrying William's child, they'd kill you too. After William's disappearance, and not in my right senses, I started to drink the twins' tea and wear their rose-tinted specs. It was easier to play a part in their world than to resist. Resisting made me think of William, and it was too much for me to bear. They weren't able to take my imagination, I suspect, when I look back now, as I could still think for myself, but grief took my mind from me, for a while at least. Then one day I found the wooden glasses in the Archer's Emporium. They looked so different to the rest of the specs that I tried them on, and discovered the real horror the twins had created." She stopped for a minute. Macula was shaking, as though the memories were all too much. Violet squeezed Boy's hand, longing for him to say something to ease his mother's pain. "I went to No Man's Land looking for William, but nobody had seen him, and so I believed the twins' story. I believed he'd died." Macula wept. "So I hid myself away, imperfect, hoping nobody would notice you growing inside me, and when it was time I had you in secret. The moment I held you, my life made sense. You were it, you and—" She stopped and looked into Boy's eyes. "I knew of the orphanage from my trip to the No Man's Land. It was the only way I had to protect you from the twins, so I gave you up." Her eyes welled again. "Then I surrendered to them. I knew it was the only way I could stop myself from contacting you. If they found out you existed, they'd kill you. Giving myself up to them was the only way I could ensure that you were kept secret and stayed alive. I thought of you every day. I wrote to you every day." "She did," Violet whispered. "I saw the letters." "I'm so sorry, Boy," Macula said as the tears spilled down her cheeks. She reached across to him. Boy hesitated for a minute, then held out his hand. Macula took it in hers and kissed it. Then she moved closer and wrapped him in a hug. Boy squeezed Violet's hand one last time, then let go of it. She watched as tears filled her friend's eyes. Then he closed them and buried his head deep in his mother's embrace. Violet looked away. She was teary now too. Her mother was in the corner of the room, busy chatting to Iris and Madeline about baking and a new recipe she'd just discovered. Violet was silently willing William to fix the Reimaginator when suddenly the kitchen door swung open and William walked in looking tired but happy. "Rose," he said with a smile, "would you mind following me? I've a few books I'd like to discuss with you for the next book club." "Oh," Rose said, turning away from Iris, "that's very kind of you. We're always looking for new suggestions." Her mam dusted off her apron, then followed William from the room. Violet and her dad looked at each other. Neither spoke or moved or even took a breath. It seemed like an eternity as the sucking noises seeped in under the kitchen door. Then loud snoring filled the room, and Violet's heart beat faster. After what felt like an age, there was movement in the hall outside. Violet stood up from the table as the kitchen door opened. Rose Brown stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she searched the room for her family. Violet raced to her mother as Eugene pushed back his seat and stood up. Rose opened her arms and Violet flung herself into them. Moments later, her dad was by their side, wrapping them both in a huge bear hug. "Welcome back, Rose," Eugene said, kissing her forehead. "I missed you, Ma'am," Violet choked. "I thought I'd never—" "Shh, Violet," her mother soothed. "I'm back now, and I'll never leave you, either of you again." "Ma'am," Violet said, pulling back from her embrace. "Yes," Rose whispered. "Promise me you'll never join another book club." Everyone burst into laughter, as if a weight had been lifted in the room. When the mood settled, Macula stood up from the table. "William," she said, still holding firm to Boy's hand, "I've someone I'd like you to meet." He looked at Macula, then down at Boy. Violet watched as her friend blushed and pushed himself up from the table to stand beside his mother. A sharp cry filled the room. "I knew it! I felt it in my bones!" Iris exclaimed, looking from Boy to William and back again. "Boy is our son," Macula almost whispered. William steadied himself against the table, then took 2 strides and wrapped his family in a huge embrace. After a few moments, Iris shuffled across the room and put her hand on William's shoulder. "Do you mind if I join in?" she smiled, poking her head into the reunion. "I've waited a long time to give my grandson a squeeze." And that's the end of chapter 35.